Imagination is one of the most useful tools of mankind, but also one of the most harmful. People from the Middle Ages already proved it. The men of this culture were able to transform the horrors of their time into tales and stories about fantastic beasts living in distant lands or lurking on the borders of their villages. Of course, this quickly turned them into a constant and present threat to the men of that time. However, the origins of these creatures isn't known with certainty. We lack dates and specific locations. Most come from oral accounts and stories of long-forgotten peoples who crisscross the world to become the shadowy creatures you're about to meet today. Do you think you have what it takes to make this trip back in time? Would you like to discover the creepiest monsters of the Middle Ages? If you're up for it, then it's time to get started. Number 7. Unicorns. The ancient Greeks were the forerunners of most of the mythological monsters we know today. From their papyri come such iconic creatures as sphinxes, cyclops, and even unicorns. Of course, according to ancient accounts, unicorns were inspired by some travels to distant lands that we know today as India. In fact, it's believed they were inspired by a rhinoceros, although there's no certainty about this. The only thing that's known with accuracy is that during the Middle Ages, this monstrous beast acquired a new image. One of the first writers to depict unicorns was Isidore of Seville in the 7th century. His account describes it as a four-legged beast with a single horn on its forehead, so four-headed that it could pierce even the emblematic castles of the time. Throughout the Middle Ages, the image of the unicorn mutated into small horse with a horn with magical properties that were used to create all kinds of mysterious concoctions. Number 6. Ogres. One of the most terrifying and transcendental medieval monsters of the Middle Ages has a great presence in the modern world. These are the orcs. The famous creatures of video games whose green skin and enormous size make humans tremble. Their origins can be traced back to various cultures and mythological traditions. Before them, the tallest human might look like a weakling, as their bodies are used to war and their thirst for blood drives them to a great appetite for human flesh. According to European lore, ogres lack intelligence, are clumsy, brutish, and have an inexplicable fascination with violence. Their only goal in life is to survive, and to do so they are capable of confronting any adversary or committing the most heinous crimes, the most perverse of which is to devour newborn children. Throughout Europe, especially towards the east, the legends of these monsters were extremely popular and marked part of the folklore of many tribes and peoples. It's unknown where these creatures might come from, but based on their attitudes and stories, they can only come from a terrible place. Number 5. Centaurs. Another of the most interesting creatures of the Middle Ages has been a recurrent character in fables, fantasy, and several novels of our times. We are talking about the Centaurs, very particular beings whose body is formed by a human head, arms and a torso descending to a waist and 4 horse legs. Their first appearances date back to the Greeks. According to their earliest accounts, these creatures were the representation of the human struggle between low instincts, embodied by the horse body, and the civilized behaviors of mankind. However, during the Middle Ages, this dual character, often represented from an intellectual perspective, was transformed into one of the most brutal savage beings of the forests. The stories catalog him as a lawless and inhospitable beast. Moreover, it was portrayed as an animal devoted to its passions, and, for this reason, they abducted, possessed, and attacked human beings without any remorse. Number 4. Dragons. There's no creature that represents the epic and mythology of the Middle Ages as much as dragons. These terrifying monsters, which ate legions of knights for breakfast, are one of the most depicted beasts of all time. They appear in books, plays, and even movies. Their symbol has become an image of those centuries, and their legends are as famous as castles. All accounts describe dragons in a similar way. Most claim that it comes from a serpent, although scholars have never agreed with this idea. Nevertheless, it was believed to be a representation of sin, greed, avarice, and many of the evils recorded in the Bible. Hence, its huge body only thought of destroying and satisfying the most perverse desires. Generally, these creatures of the Middle Ages had the size of an elephant, a tail as long as that of a crocodile, a large, horned head, and a jaw capable of crushing an entire cow without any difficulty. Additionally, these beasts were capable of spitting fire and reducing crops and entire cities to ashes. Few brave men dared to face this creature, and all kinds of extraordinary legends have survived to this day. Number 3. Manticores. On the other hand, during the Middle Ages, a forgotten creature reappeared in the stories of historians and among the tales of commoners. No one knew what this creature meant exactly, but those who crossed its path met death. In fact, its form was impossible to explain, as it went beyond the laws of nature by joining several animal parts and even some human parts. The name given to this creature was Manticore, and the ancient Greeks already considered it within the classification of chimeras due to the strange elements that made up its body. According to descriptions, it combined the body of a lion, the tail of a scorpion, the head of a horned man, and the size of a horse. Its sharp legs were a deadly weapon, and some scholars even considered it a representation of the monstrosities of the human being. The deformation of its body was a clear sign of the terrible times that were passing in the Middle Ages and how distant humans were from faith. Number 2. Cyanocephalus. The famous Cyanocephalus, better known as dog-headed man, was one of the most disturbing creatures that was present during the Middle Ages. They began to have numerous appearances in the time of the Lombards, when Europe was experiencing great changes and constant bloody invasions. It's believed that this creature was precisely introduced in Europe by this civilization, since these monsters were of Egyptian origin. However, history doesn't make it entirely clear to what extent these dog-headed men were considered to be real. Many rivals of the Lombards tried to ridicule these legends, but one by one, their civilizations were crushed by these great warriors protected by destructive and death-bearing creatures. Number 1. Blemier. This name may not lead you to anything you have ever known in your life, but during the Middle Ages, the legend of this monstrous people was part of the horror stories of all medieval societies. The Blemier were humans who lurked in the most inhospitable places in Europe, and encountering them meant dying of a heart attack. These creatures had no head and no apparent face. They were bodies that moved without a face to look at. However, when someone crossed their paths, they discovered that what they were looking for in the head was in the chest. The Blemier had a face on the torso of the body. They wore 2 eyes on each shoulder and a horseshoe-shaped mouth in the middle of the chest. Most lacked noses, and some could even have these features on their backs. No one knew what to do in the face of these creatures. Fear paralyzed them completely, and very few managed to escape alive from their frightening presence. Ground Zero. Basilisks. The reptile kingdom is one that men and women of the Middle Ages learned to fear from an early age. The reasons are varied, but the most important of them all lie in a creature that, for decades, was man's main threat. We are talking about the mythical basilisks, the kings of reptiles, the biggest snake that could kill its victims in 1,000 different ways. This creature used to be described as a thick, grotesque-sized reptile that would wander through the quietest places and trap its victims with its huge body and press them until it crushed their bones. Another of its favorite methods of killing humans was its gaze. Accounts claim that it could permanently paralyze its victims, at least long enough to receive its lethal and powerful bite with its sharp teeth and venomous tongue. Of course, like the rest of the stories, their existence is recorded in numerous copies from documentation of the medieval times. Interestingly, each legend was replicated in numerous countries at the same time. Some believe that these stories were inspired by real events. Although it's unknown which monsters that inhabit our world may have served as inspiration for these mysterious legends. However, if you want to know some real and truly terrifying monsters that could have served as inspiration for the man of the Middle Ages, you'd better join us in the following videos and see for yourself that some of the most terrifying creatures in the world are not in books, but in forests, oceans, and closer to you than you can imagine.